Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 143. And just a little catch up from the last couple issues. Alec, Holland, and Swamp Thing have been separated into two separate beings by the Parliament of Trees. So now there is a soulless, giant, bad Swamp Thing going around and killing people based on the memories of Alec Holland. So it's trying to kill Chester. It went to Chester's house and killed a bunch of people. It went to Terrebonne Parish and killed a bunch of Cajuns, including LeBeau. And now it is after Abby. And she was actually warned in a dream that this was going to happen, so she has left her current boyfriend, Dawn, and is on the run so that she can protect Dawn. But that didn't seem to help because in the last issue, on the last page, we saw that Swamp Thing appeared and he was about to attack her at the motel that she was stopping at in Arizona. Meanwhile, the soul that is Alec Holland that was ripped out of that Swamp Thing has formed himself a new body, and it's out of plants, but he looks human. But because of this, he's having some kind of identity crisis. He never felt like a real person, and also he was having dreams constantly, especially when he was high on plant psychedelics, that he was this thing called Swamp Thing, and he had a life before. So after tripping on some hallucinogens with a shaman, he also heard that Abby was going to be killed, so he was leaving his research over in South America to come try to protect Abby in New Orleans. But on his way there, as he was walking through the forest, he began to have hallucinations again, and he was in some pretty nightmarish dreamscapes, but eventually he did have his revelation that he in fact is a plant. And once he gained that knowledge, he was able to get out of that dreamscape, and he ended up appearing in the swamps of Louisiana just in time to see the death garden that the Swamp Thing monster had made of Terrebonne Parish. So now he knows that Abby is next, and he is trying to find her. And that's where we left off. So first things first, with issue 143, we got the cover. We see a very thin and emaciated Swamp Thing creature that has been set ablaze and is on fire. And that's pretty much it. In the background, it's just orange glow of fire. And the super thin Swamp Thing is burning. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Grant Morrison and Mark Miller, with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And we start off on the first page, I'm assuming somewhere in Louisiana, not 100% because they don't say it, but we see Alec Holland on a payphone, and he's called the residence of Abby, and he is saying, "Hello? I need to speak to Abby Cable. She's in terrible danger." And we don't hear what the other person says, but we hear Alec's answer say, "What? I'm sorry, it's the traffic. I can't hear a word. Abby's gone? Jesus, what happened? She disappeared? Oh my God." And then the panels keep zooming in to Alec. And now I guess we're so close we can hear what Dawn is saying on the phone. And Dawn is saying, "Don't worry, Abby's a very capable woman. I'm sure she'll be okay." And to this, Alec just says, "Oh shit." And then he drops the phone and runs away. Then as we turn the page, we cut to Arizona, and we see Abby is running away from the Swamp Thing monster. And if that's not bad enough, of course it's pouring rain, and it's storming, and there's lightning. And we see the name of this issue is called Desert Hearts. So as the Swamp Thing monster chases Abby, she runs back to her car, and she yells, "Don't do this, Alec! Please! Get away from me!" And the Swamp Thing monster is kind of like swiping at her with his big hand, but she is able to dodge it. And she reaches inside the car, and she pulls out a shotgun. And apparently this is a very powerful shotgun, because she looks at Swamp Thing and says, "I'm warning you." But the Swamp Thing just comes at her again. So she shoots him in the midsection, and it blows his body in half. Then she jumps in the car quickly and tries to start it. But of course, the dang thing won't start. And she's saying, "Oh shit. Oh God, start. You bastard, start." And of course, the Swamp Thing isn't slowed down by that gun blast. It starts to rebuild its body pretty much immediately. And the whole time the Swamp Thing is building his body back, she's turning the key, it's not doing anything, and she's saying, "Start, damn it, come on!" And then the Swamp Thing grabs her car door and crunches the section he's grabbing onto, and just as he does that, the car does finally start, and she drives off, and Swamp Thing keeps hold of the door, and the door actually pulls off the car. But she's not out of danger yet. As Abby's speeding away, she looks in the rearview mirror and sees the Swamp Thing in it, and she says, "Oh, Jesus." And then Swamp Thing's arms shoot from his body and grow super long so that they can grab the bumper of her car, which they do. And as he lifts the back wheels of the car from the ground, stopping it in its tracks, Abby yells, "Alec, no! Get away from me, you!" But her words are cut off by the honking horn of a semi-truck that has just come upon this scene of Swamp Thing and Abby in the rain, and it doesn't have time to stop as it collides with the Swamp Thing. And the force of the truck does rip Swamp Thing's arms off of the car, so the car falls back down and Abby drives away. Then as we turn the page, we cut away from that scene to the Amazon, where we see Anne, Mike, and Lawrence, the three friends of Alec that were in the Amazon while he was doing his research. And I'm assuming this is in the Amazon, but they don't really say. We just see the three of them in a room, and they're all kind of falling asleep in different parts of the room. Like Anne's on the bed, Lawrence is in a chair, and Mike is resting his head on the desk. And Mike is saying, "Would anyone like a drink? I'm making one for myself." And Anne replies, "I could really use a coffee, Mike. Jesus, I can hardly keep my eyes open. Feel so sleepy." Then we cut to a different room where we see three voodoo dolls, I guess you call them. They're just kind of indescript dolls that are sewn together. They actually all look kind of like the Oogie Boogie Man from Nightmare Before Christmas. Then we see a hand reach out and pick up those dolls, and it is the hand of Roberto the shaman, and he's saying, "Your work is done, little ones. Rest now. Rest in your sack till I need you again." So I guess they're implying that those three people that Alec was hanging out with in the Amazon were actually planted there by Roberto himself. I'm not even sure if they're real people or if they're just constructs that he is controlling through these dolls. But it seems he was using them to manipulate Alec wherever he needed him to go to get into his hallucination state so he could realize that he was the Swamp Thing still. And we also see that Roberto is not alone in this room. We see the old traveler from the train, and also Al Blake, the smoking man from the bar that was in Alec's hallucination just before he got onto the Soul Train in the last issue. So the old traveler says to Roberto, "I hope Holland survives this. I like him." And Roberto replies, "The Parliament knows what it is doing. This has been prepared for. If Holland does not survive this first of the initiations, then he is not the one." And the old traveler says, "Could we not have given him some hint as to what is to happen? Surely the Parliament of Stones has..." But the old traveler is cut off by L. Blake, who says, "If he knew what was to happen, his heart would freeze over. The ordeal of the bleeding tree awaits him in Germany." And the old traveler says, "God help him, Blake." And then there's a little interaction where Roberto is looking for a way to light his cigarette, and the old traveler actually pulls out a match and lights it for him. And I guess this is kind of a dig on Roberto's use of technology because he's looking for a lighter, and the old traveler says that lighters are too important to waste on cigarettes. I'm not exactly sure why that matters, but I guess it was just kind of like banter between them. But we do see L. Blake with some sort of game device in his hands, and he's watching what Alec is doing. And L. Blake says to the other two, "Let's not relax just yet, my friends. This game is only beginning." And Roberto says, "I thought I made it past the hospital stage." And then we see on the handheld game device, a hospital's on the screen, and L. Blake says to Roberto, "Look, there is a second level, Roberto. The old man is waking. Many old things are waking now." Then we cut back to Abby in the desert, and she is sitting on top of her car while the sun beats down on her, and it seems like she's probably waiting for that Swamp Thing to finally catch up with her. But it seems like the area she has gone is definitely part of her strategy to fight this thing, because there are no plants around that she can see. It's just desert sand and rock formations. And the only thing plant life that she does have is the rose that was left to her after Matthew the Raven visited her in her dream and warned her that Swamp Thing was going to try to come kill her. So she's looking at this rose hanging out on the top of the hood of her car, and she has the shotgun with her still, which is good, because all of a sudden she sees some dust coming up, and this literally looks like something from the movie Tremors, where you can see the ground heaving up, but underneath it, instead of a giant worm, we can see some green forming, and it's heading straight for Abby's car, and it's going super fast. And at first, Abby doesn't notice it, but as it gets closer, the noise gets louder, and she turns and sees it and yells, "Jesus Christ!" And then the Swamp Thing bursts from the dirt and flips over her car and yells, "Abby!" But luckily, as Abby flips from the top of the car and onto the ground, she lands on her feet and she doesn't lose grip of her shotgun, so she just fires 5 shots immediately at the Swamp Thing. And it seems like everyone hits home, because we see in the next panel that the body of this Swamp Thing has been blown apart yet again. And it seems like maybe she's sad for a second, because she says, "Oh God, no." But then we see the evil Swamp Thing has grown another body behind her, and she says, "Oh shit." And as she turns around to shoot it again, the Swamp Thing actually does a crazy move where he vomits what I guess is chlorophyll into her face, and she begins yelling as she runs away, "My eyes! Jesus Christ! You blinded me, Alec!" And then as she's running away from him, but she's rubbing her eyes so she can't see anything, the Swamp Thing causes a tree to grow right in front of her, and she runs headfirst into it, knocking her onto the ground. And then the Swamp Thing begins to walk to her, and vines begin growing out of the ground and wrapping around her legs and arms and holding her down. And she's pleading with the Swamp Thing, saying, "Don't do this! For God's sake, it's me, you dumb shit! It's Abby!" And then she screams, "Alec!" as the vines wrap tighter around her, and even some of them are going in her mouth. So it's a pretty horrific scene. And just as she's yelling Alec's name, all of a sudden, a car appears out of nowhere, and it comes flying over a sand dune and jumps over Abby, landing in front of Swamp Thing. And we cut to the inside where we see Alec Holland has arrived. And he yells out, "Bastard!" as he runs the car into the Swamp Thing. And the vines immediately release Abby, and she says, "Alec? Jesus!" And then as she gets up, she sees inside the car and sees that the driver is in fact the human Alec Holland. And she says, "Oh my God." And then funnily enough, I guess because the Swamp Thing burst apart, its guts went everywhere, but from its guts, grass and stuff begin to grow. So now the car is covered with grass and it can't really move. And from the driver's seat, Alec turns to Abby and says, "Get out of here, Abby, for Christ's sake." And then the car begins to get sucked down into the ground by some vines. And Abby's still not sure what she's seeing because I don't even know if she's even seen Alec Holland as a human before. I can't think of a time where she saw a picture of the human Alec Holland before he was Swamp Thing. So as the car gets pulled down, she yells, "Alec, is that you?" And as she yells this, the human Alec bursts from the top of the car, like literally through the metal top of the car. So it seems even though he still looks human, he has definitely realized that he is more than human, and he has superhuman strength. So as he bursts through the top, he yells, "Jesus, Abby, don't just stand and watch, run!" And then all the vines that were grabbing the car begin to form into one giant mass, and we see the face of Swamp Thing appear in this mass, and it kind of swoops up and looks directly at Alec Holland's face. And Alec says, "Oh shit!" And then as Abby runs away, she yells, "Its eyes, Alec! Go for its eyes!" So Alec punches his hand into the right eye of Swamp Thing, and it reels back in pain as this happens, which allows Alec to jump off the top of the car. And as he does, he says, "It's not dead yet, Abby. Keep moving. Oh God, I don't think I can kill it. What if I can't stop it?" And as he catches up to her in the desert, she says, "What are you talking about? What is that thing, Alec? Why do you look human again?" But he just grabs her by the arm and says, "There's no time to explain. Come on." And then he takes off running with her. And as they run, she yells, "Oh my God, it's growing a new body." And the new body of the Swamp Thing is pretty close to them, like within 15 feet, I would think. And it shoots out some vines to grab at them. And as Alec and Abby try to run away, Abby says, "It's still coming. Jesus, Alec, what'll I do?" And Alec answers, "Go to the car. Get the gasoline. I'll try to hold it back. Go." But just as he says go, vines wrap around his neck and pull him back to the Swamp Thing. But Abby is actually able to make it back to her car, and she begins to look through the trunk, and she's saying, "Shit, where's the gas, damn it?" Which is kind of funny because if you remember in the last issue, she had like a whole trunk full of gas cans that were full before. But I guess maybe she's used them all while she was driving into the middle of nowhere in the desert. But while she's doing that, we cut to Alec, who's just standing in front of this very angry, murderous Swamp Thing. And Alec says, "For God's sake, Abby." But his words are cut off as Swamp Thing punches through his chest. And we see blood pour out of the back of Alec and Swamp Thing's arm coming through him. And Alec finishes his sentence saying, "Hurry!" And then as Abby is running to him with a can of gasoline, and as she sees Alec hanging off of the fist of this Swamp Thing, she yells out, "Alec!" But even though Alec is hanging off of the Swamp Thing's fist, he says, "Don't look at me, Abby. Hurry, for God's sake." But unfortunately, as she's running, a vine shoots out of the ground next to her and grabs hold of her, which sends her falling, and she yells, "Ah, my legs! It's got my legs, Alec!" And this was a big mistake. And I guess because he's cornered and Abby is injured and also trapped, it seems finally Alec is releasing the inner Swamp Thing within him, because his eyes go red and he yells, "Get away from her, you bastard!" And then he punches the Swamp Thing in the face, which explodes its head. And this also makes it so it lets go of Abby, so she grabs the cans of gasoline, and as she runs up, Alec yells, "Now, Abby, pour on the gasoline!" And as Abby pours the gasoline on, the Swamp Thing is struggling, but Alec is holding on to it, and he's saying, "Please, Abby, I can't hold on much longer." And the gasoline isn't just being poured on the Swamp Thing, she's pouring it on Alec as well. And Abby is noticing this, and she's saying, "Oh, Alec," because she's getting worried. And then strangely, I guess in a callback to the scene with Roberto, the old traveler, and Blake, where Roberto couldn't find his lighter, it was because it was in Alec's pocket, apparently. Because he pulls the lighter out, and he flicks it, and with red Swamp Thing eyes coming out again, he says, "Burn, asshole!" And then both of them are engulfed in flames immediately. And as Alec burns, he yells out, "Abby!" And at first, Abby was running away from the flames, but she turns around when she hears her name, and she says, "Alec!" And then she realizes that they're both burning alive, and she says, "Oh God, oh dear God." And then she falls to the ground on her knees and begins to cry. But as she falls, we see in the foreground the rose that Matthew the Raven left her after her first dream. And the rose begins to move and sprout vines and leaves and grow bigger until finally it grows Alec Holland's Swamp Thing body. And Abby heard the noises of the growing, so she turns around and she sees the Alec Holland Swamp Thing standing in front of her, and he says, "Hello, Abby." And she's in shock at seeing this, of course, and she says, "Alec, is that really you?" And as Swamp Thing reaches out and lifts her up, he says, "Yes, Abby, I came back so that we could be together again. Even death cannot part us in our love." But at those last words of "in our love," Abby kind of pushes him away and says, "Oh God, Alec, I'm so sorry. I can't do this. I can't." And Swamp Thing says, "What do you mean?" And then Abby walks away from him and says, "Jesus, look at you, Alec. Look at this terrible world you live in. I'm a human being. I want to live a normal life." And Swamp Thing walks after her and starts pleading, saying, "I can make myself look like a man now, Abby. I can be anyone you ever wanted." But she turns around angrily and says, "Oh, Alec, stop it. This is insane. Can't you understand what I'm saying? What am I supposed to say? I don't want you anymore. I've had enough." And as she wipes tears from her face, she begins to walk away from him again. But he still pleads with her, saying, "All those things you said to me as I held you, Abby, the promise that you would never let go. Were you lying, Abby? Were you just making a fool of me?" And Abby replies, "I can't take this, Alec. I'm sorry, really. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't be part of this madness anymore. I've lost my friends, my daughter. I'm losing my mind." And then Swamp Thing falls to his knees and he says, "Abby, please. We don't have to be lovers. I understand. Please." And then he begins to crawl on the dirt towards her and he says, "I came through hell for you. I just want to touch you one last time." And Abby, not looking at him, says, "I can't. Goodbye, Alec." And then a very distressed Swamp Thing kind of claws at his chest, and his face looks very crazy as he stares at her walking away, and he yells, "Abby!" And she just walks off into the sunset saying, "I'm sorry. I don't belong in a world of monsters, Alec. That's your world, not mine. Not anymore." And as she walks off out of sight, Swamp Thing stands in the dirt, and he holds out his hand to her, and we just get a silent splash page of Swamp Thing pining after Abby. Then as we turn the page, we get text that reads Epilogue 1, Freiburg, Germany. And in the first panel, we see a hospital that looks very reminiscent to the hospital that was on the game console that Roberto, Senior Blake, and the old traveler were watching. And we're hearing someone yell on the inside, "Mr. Kostler, Mr. Kostler, you must get back to bed." Then we cut to the inside and we see an old man running through the halls, and he has on like a medical gown, so this is obviously a patient. And as he runs down the halls, we cut to the nurse that was yelling after him, and she's saying to another nurse, "This is impossible. He's been comatose for 8 years. His legs should be too weak to walk." And she's saying this in German, but it's being translated for us. And as Mr. Kostler is running down the hall, he grabs a sheet from a nearby cart, and he pauses for a second, and he says, "Wait a moment. There is something not quite right. And then he takes the sheet that he had grabbed from the cart and he begins to wrap it around his head like a turban. And as he does this, the nurse comes up to him and says, "Mr. Colster?" And then Mr. Colster finishes the turban wrapping on his head, and he looks up at her with an evil smile and says, "Ah, that's much better." Then we turn the page and we get some more text that says, Epilogue 2, Stonehenge, England. And the first panel is definitely of Stonehenge, and from those stones we can hear someone saying, "I have a message from the Parliament of Trees. The Swamp Thing fears the wrath of the Green, and will soon be traveling east, seeking sanctuary in the shade of the Black Forest." And then we see whatever is saying this is growing out of some roots from the ground, and it seems to be looking at the stones as it's talking. And I believe this is some sort of plant that has grown from the Parliament, because it does look like it's made of roots and wood, but it also looks kind of insect-like and also like a xenomorph from Alien. And it continues talking, saying, "He has passed the first stage of his ordeal, and will shortly be entering the realm of the Parliament of Stones. We trust you will take care of matters from here." And then we get a pulled out shot of the stones from Stonehenge in silhouette, and the narration over them says, "The sky darkens and a cold wind blows across the moor. The answer comes as a deep seismic tremor. The Parliament of Stones has spoken." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. And this was a pretty awesome issue. We saw the return of Alec Holland's Swamp Thing and a pretty epic fight. And also that scene at the end where Swamp Thing is begging Abby to stay with him and she doesn't is just heartbreaking. Phil Hester really knocked it out of the park with the art on that section. And we also learned that there is more than just a Parliament of Trees. There is actually a Parliament of Stones as well. But we'll have to wait until next time to see what happens with all that stuff. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains&comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.